For those of you who are joining for the first time and haven't met me, my name is Paul Kassan. I'm a lawyer at Wishart Law Firm. Been practicing municipal law for 22 years, and I've got a fantastic team with me. Today we have Nuala Kenny, who is sitting 6 feet away from Tim Harmer in his office. Nuala Kenny is a certified municipal law specialist and was the city solicitor for Sault Ste. Marie for close to 20 years before we stole her. Tim Harmer is sitting beside her. He is, he's Tim. He's a lawyer practicing and supporting our team. He does a lot of intellectual property work, does a lot of research and drafting, and if you've ever got an interesting interpretation problem, the answer will no doubt be filtered through Tim at some point in the process. Mia Corella is with us. She's been with our firm for 5 years now. I can't believe it. She's been prosecuting municipal provincial offenses for 3 years, has done that for the city of Sault Ste. Marie and many other municipalities, and so she's certainly available for municipalities who are interested in doing some bylaw enforcement, and is an excellent resource for advice in that respect. Below her on my screen is Lacey LaCory. She is a paralegal who has joined our office, and she's been doing a lot of work helping us drafting many reports that we've had. So Lacey is certainly somebody you may talk to if you contact our office. And Brittany Hodgkinson is our municipal group point person. She's the one that's sending out and coordinating these meetings. We also have Brittany Valley with us, who is one of our other assistants. She's the one that looks like the camera with the X through it. She typically looks better than that. And my assistant Linda Hurdle is also on, but I can't see her. And Linda keeps me sane. So that's our team. And I'm so happy we've got 50 people that have joined us today. So a number of sort of housekeeping reminders. One thing that we have found, we've been sending out blasts as issues happen. And so we'll send out a short one-page sheet about an urgent issue that has come forward. We've heard that many people are losing that in their junk mail, so they're not seeing it. We found that just in conversation with people. So have a look in your junk mail, and if you have one of our communications in the junk mail, if you just click not junk on it, then the rest of them in the future will come to you so that you can see them. This is eligible for AMCTO training credits. So keep track of the webinars that you attend. We're doing these every week. And if you're working on your AMCTO certificates, we're very happy that AMCTO has agreed to partner with us and give you credit for this. During the course of the presentation today, if you have questions, we want to try to answer them. So at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the chat feature. Brittany Hodgkinson is co-hosting with me today, so she'll be able to monitor those, and we'll try to answer the questions as we go. I expect that everybody is aware, but the province has extended the emergency yesterday to May the 6th. And the indication from the Premier when that extension was given is that after May the 6th, if things are going well, it's going to be a slow and staged reopening whenever that happens. So we're in this for a number of weeks. I wanted everybody to be aware that that got extended. Now, I know that there are some counselors on today, and you're certainly very welcome. I'm really happy to have you here. We have a poll, and counselors can answer as well, but we have prepared a poll of questions for municipal staff to answer so that we can measure how things are working for you and how the pandemic is affecting you and what assistance we might be able to give you. So I'm going to put that poll up in a little bit, and I would ask you to answer. Next week, we're inviting our council members who are interested to come, and we're going to be talking further about how to the municipal team, Occupational Health and Safety Act type obligations, and just how the municipal staff team is working. So we wanted to bring councillors in on that next week if we can. So please share the invitation with any of your councillors who would be interested in attending. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open the poll. And while I do that, I'm going to ask to explain the polling questions. Some of them are pretty obvious, but just so that you understand what we're going to ask you. Now, down in the corner of the screen, I don't know what that means. And I'll hand it over to Nuala to speak to the ideas behind the questions.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Again, I am just delighted that there's so many of you joining us. Gives us a real pulse on how you're doing, and it's just, we're thrilled that you're safe and healthy and in a position to join us this morning. And again, I thank you. I know all of your work is very, very taxing right now, and to devote some time to us, we're really, really flattered that you spend this time with us this morning and have been for the past couple of weeks. Part of the topics that we're going to be talking about today is just how the working through the pandemic is affecting people emotionally and stress-wise, and that's really the focus of our poll this morning. We're hoping that when we see what the results look like, we may be able to present them at our next webinar where it'll be more targeted to city councils. We've been hearing from people across the board that they're feeling really taxed and worried, and that's sort of the focus of the question. So the first question is, are you feeling more stressed than usual while working during the pandemic? So that's just your day-to-day workload has changed. Do you find that it is, I know for myself working from home, I've had a lot of stress just with the technical issues. Again, this morning I was in another room preparing for the webinar, and then my audio went static. So it's very frustrating. I've got to come over and talk to you about staying safe during the pandemic, and I'm not 6 feet away from Tim. So that's, you know, the whole bundle of stress that comes with it. And the second question really focuses on an increase in work. Do you have an increase in work? Are you doing work that you wouldn't normally do because other non-essential workers are not there to help you? The essential workers, a lot of them are teleworking or working remotely. Is that adding to your workload? And if so, by what percentage? And then the final question really focuses on just your worry and anxiety level, not to do with the volume of work per se, but just are you feeling anxiety? Are you fearful walking into the workplace? Are you worried about getting sick? Are you concerned about your health or your family's health? And we're hoping to get a read on those 3 areas through our little poll. So when you answer it, it'll be submitted to Brittany and Paul, and you'll see the results, I think, at the end of our session today.
Perfect. Thanks, Nuala. So we had some questions before the webinar last week about public gatherings and understanding what is and isn't permitted. Tim spoke a little bit about marinas, and today he's going to talk about public gatherings, parks, and cemeteries. And so I'll hand this over to Tim for that portion.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, last week we were talking about some questions came up about closing parks, municipal-owned parks, and one of the things that came up is the question of whether a park has to close, and if so, whether people can continue to walk through parks. And so the first thing I wanted to talk about is the concept that parks do not need to close. We may have seen, some of you may have seen, there's an order out now that closing provincial parks, but municipal parks do not have to close. That being said, you can choose to close your parks if you desire to. There are certain areas though, even if you decide to keep your parks open, there are certain areas that have to close. For example, any off-leash dog areas have to close. In addition, the order talks about outdoor recreation amenities, and so other things that have to close if your park contains certain amenities like baseball diamonds, and I have the list in front of me here. It's baseball diamonds, soccer fields, frisbee golf locations, tennis, platform tennis, table tennis, and pickleball courts, basketball courts, BMX parks. I talked about off-leash dog areas already. All portions of park and recreational areas containing outdoor fitness equipment, all outdoor allotment gardens and community gardens, and all outdoor picnic sites, benches, and shelters in park and recreational areas. So those areas, if you decide to keep the park, one or more parks open, if those parks have those types of recreational amenities, those portions of the park containing those have to be closed. And what the government has done is said, for greater clarity, nothing in this order precludes individuals from walking through or using portions of park or recreational areas that are not otherwise closed and do not contain an outdoor recreational amenity described in the list that I just provided. And so what that says is, if you keep the order says you don't have to close your parks. If you keep them open, you do have to close those areas that are identified, but nothing in the order prevents somebody from walking through the park, taking a walk, etc., unless of course you've decided to close the park. And so that last part is just for greater clarity to suggest that people can still walk through an open park. They just can't walk through those areas that are supposed to be closed under that list, those outdoor recreational amenities. And so that's essentially it on parks. I'm happy to answer any questions if any come up in the chat. And so the other, I'm just trying to think of what the other, Paul can help remind me. I think there was another piece that I was going to speak about. And I think it was I think it was cemeteries, actually, if memory serves, from our last webinar. There was a question about cemeteries that came up and whether cemeteries have to close. We know the rule is a little different with funerals. As we know, the organized public events and social gatherings are limited to 5 or fewer people, whereas funerals are 10 or fewer. And so what the Bereavement Authority of Ontario has said, I've read some of their guidance documents. They've said cemeteries, much like parks, do not have to close. But again, the rule about funeral gatherings remains. And so if the cemetery, you can voluntarily close a cemetery, of course, just like we talked about with parks. Bereavement Authority Ontario says that cemeteries do have to be open for burials, however, and of course respecting the 10 or fewer people if there's a gathering related to a funeral going on there. And so you can close the cemetery to visitors, but the cemeteries do have to be open according to Bereavement Authority of Ontario for burial purposes. So that's the answer on cemeteries. And I'm just noticing there are some questions coming in. I'm just having a look. I've got my eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I've got to get closer to my screen. So there are a couple questions about marinas, and I'm just looking at what those are here. So marina question: if a resident moored at a local marina for recreational purposes, not for access to a permanent residence, prior to the orders from the province, can they remain moored? is this at the discretion of the marina owner? So that's a good question. So they were. I'm just rereading it to make sure I fully understand it. So marinas are closed. This is a question I'd like to address at the next webinar, because marinas are closed with the exception, as the question indicates, with the exception of for provision of, for example, somebody going to their private residence from the marina. Recreational mooring right now would be not permitted under the order, but this question relates to whether somebody was moored there for a recreational purpose before the order came into force. And so that's a question I think I'd like to address at our next webinar, and Brittany, I'll ask you to make a note of that one. Another question was waterfront parks with informal access to the water, not a marina, okay to launch kayaks. So the boat, this is a question I think directed towards boat launches. And the answer to that question is yes, that would be okay for somebody to launch, for example, to launch a kayak or other boating sort of boating device from a park that's adjacent to the waterfront. Because a boat launch, they differentiate boat launch from marinas, and so that would be okay.
Tim, Paul's thinking maybe we should answer these later.
Okay.
So we can get on with the substance of the session, maybe.
Okay. Well, you know what, guys, I'm going to wrap up my portion. I'm sorry I didn't get to all of the questions, but Paul's right. We do want to keep the agenda moving. I am going to look at the other questions though, and feel free to send us emails if anything else comes up, and I'll try and address those at our next session, or by an email out to everyone. So thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate it, and I'll turn things back over to Paul to keep things going.
Thanks a lot, Tim. So one of the things that we are finding a lot of questions on, and what we want to talk about now, relates to workload and the poll. And so what we're going to talk about are three issues. One is the concept of time management and best practices, and Nuala and I have some comments on that. Then an issue with respect to MFIPA requests, and then the idea of a communications committee program to deal with communications with ratepayers. So I'm going to hand this over to Nuala, and we're going to start with time management tasks and best practices. And we've been certainly talking with municipal affairs about this idea, and just want to give you some guidance and some thoughts about how to help manage the limited time that municipal staff have right now. So I'll hand this over to Nuala.
Good morning again, everyone. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of people dealing with a lot of different areas that perhaps is not generally considered in their work gamut. And the volume is very, very high, and it's very, very taxing. So a couple of things that we found have been effective. The first is, and we're hearing it again and again, every time we contact the ministry, we hear the same message from them, which is prioritize. That's a message that councils need to hear, and that's a message that staff need to hear. Now is the perfect time to defer non-prioritized matters. So I know city council meetings often have a feel-good session at the beginning, or they bring maybe a local Girl Guide troop in to discuss something. This is not the time for anything that is other than essential in terms of matters that should be going before city council. The second idea, and you're going to hear it again when Mia and I start talking about stress management in the workplace, is right now there really and truly is an information overload. It's very difficult to even watch the news. In fact, I was telling one of the ladies that I work with that I turned on a news program, and it was talking about a retirement home in New York City. And it was just so awful. I couldn't watch it anymore. It was just too sad. So I turned on The Simpsons, and she said, "Have you seen The Simpsons episode about the pandemic?" No, is there one? Oh, yes, yes, of course there is. So it's really hard to escape it. It's very all pervasive. It's very important for you. Me and I are going to talk about it in your personal life, about really handpicking what news you choose to listen to, but in your work life as well. When we say at the beginning of these sessions, we really appreciate your time and attention, we mean it, because I know that there are a host of webinars that you could choose. We try and make them substantive. We try and make them, we try and make a takeaway for you so that you've got a checklist, or you've got a very concrete, practical idea about going ahead. But do be judicious in what you choose to listen to right now, because it is just, it's too information saturating. On that same point, really carefully consider the source. So if you're looking at, for example, best practices for social distancing, you want to go to a local public health unit, the CDC, the World Health Organization. You want to look for information from credible sources. Because if you pick everything, it'll just be too much. It'll be confusing, and it'll be very, very overwhelming for you. And then the final piece, I guess, we have in terms of time management is, just as you're going to hear us, you've heard us say in these sessions, and we're going to say it again today, it's a time for compassion and creativity. That applies to yourself as well. I'm always humbled at the level of integrity that municipal staff bring to the table. I'm always taken back at how dutiful they are, and I hear people. We talked to somebody last week who, following this session, who said, we said, have a nice weekend. And she said, well, I'll be here, coming back in on the weekend. And I think that's pretty typical of CAOs, clerks, treasurers, particularly at this time. Always, it's been my experience, they're like that, but particularly now. Cut yourself a bit of a break. Not everything is going to get done. Not everything is going to get done possibly to your level of satisfaction. It is a time to be compassionate. It's a time where you'll be forgiven in the future for making these efforts, even if they don't work out. So there's a couple of little tips that we have seen for time management. I don't know if you've got something further on that too, Paul.
Yeah, I do. I think that right now, as we indicated in the last session, it's council's responsibility to set the priorities for the municipality. And so particularly if staff are overworked, and particularly with the emergency issues, have restrictions on the amount of work that can get done just because of the amount of hours in a day, it is appropriate for councils to look at their service level bylaw. If they don't have a service level bylaw, it's not a bad idea to be thinking about one. And what I mean by that is it sets out expectations that council has about how service is going to be delivered to ratepayers. And what we're seeing, and this sort of leads into the next two sections, is that we're seeing a real increase in the level of, I'll call it aggressive communication and inquiries from ratepayers, certain ratepayers, small groups of ratepayers. And the effect that that's having is that it ends up directing staff's activity. And so particularly right now, that is an issue that council needs to be helping staff with. And one way to do it is by looking at and amending or suspending sections of the level of service bylaw, particularly if you have it in there or in a communications policy that inquiries will be answered within 24 hours. We're finding that maybe it's because there's lots of people who are home and have a lot more time to communicate with the municipality, that there are really, in some municipalities, having some crises. And so one of the ways, and I'm going to lead into the next section now and hand this back to Nuala, one of the things that we're seeing is a real uptick in Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act inquiries, which are diverting the attention of senior staff and causing problems. And so we have some ideas about that, and I would like to hand this back over to Nuala. She really practices a lot in the information and privacy sector, And so she's got a lot of experience in this area. We've got some ideas about how to help you with that if it's a problem in your municipality. So over to you, Nuala.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Following our session last week, we started looking at this information and privacy situation because, as you know, the FOI requests are time sensitive. There's strict deadlines about when you must respond, and if you're going to exceed that time, what you need to tell the applicant and so forth. But as Paul was outlining, you always had the privilege of asking for more time, and it was almost always granted. We're not talking about hugely voluminous requests. What we're saying is, if I've got a CAO or a clerk who is putting in 12 hours just trying to keep the roads clear, the garbage picked up, and manage the human resources aspects of this, while really, going into a workplace which is contrary to what the health officials are telling us to do, that person doesn't have time to respond, even if it's a minor request. Even if it's easily accessible, even if the materials are right at his or her fingertips, what we're seeing is it's just too much in the scheme of things. So if you look at the IPC's formal stance on the matter, what they say is you still have to meet the deadlines, the statutory deadlines set out in the Act. But if we get appeals, and part of the appeal is that you didn't respond in a timely manner, they said they're going to look at that quite generously. And the fact that we're in a pandemic and that all the teleworking that's going on, all the essential only work that's going on, the IPC's stance is we will take that into consideration on an appeal. We wanted actually more than that. We wanted the IPC to say the deadlines don't count right now, or as a matter of fact, you can defer all IPC requests right now. You can defer all freedom of information requests at the moment. And we didn't have that direction. So I wrote directly to the Commissioner Brian Beamish, and laid it out to explain that we have so many municipal clients, and that many of our municipal clients are very small municipalities that are at skeletal staff to begin with, and now they're trimmed even further. So really, could we have the privilege of directing them that they do not have to meet those deadlines? And Mr. Beamish wrote back to me very quickly, so I thought that was courteous, but he basically said the same thing. We don't have the authority, the IPC does not have the authority to amend the Act, so we're sticking with our original guns, which is it's a best case scenario. Do you make your best efforts? If you don't meet a deadline, it will be considered, the fact that we're in a pandemic will be a consideration on appeal. So I am a lot more conservative in my practice of law. I took that answer and accepted it, and I'm happy to present it to you today. I also told Paul. Paul is not very conservative in his practice of law. And he immediately started thinking of ways that this could be skated around. And he has several ideas. So I guess what I'm going to tell you, I don't want to get into I do not want to start giving legal advice or opinions during these sessions, but I will say, if you're a community that is being very heavily taxed with FOI requests right now, or alternatively, you're not really that heavily taxed, but you're getting them and you just cannot get to them, I think Paul has a clever solution for you. So I would invite you to contact him off grid, not during this call, and put it to him, because he does have some very clever ideas about how you can manage without running afoul of the legislation.
Thanks, Nuala. Yeah, as I've told many of my clients, I really like it when you come to me and ask how to do something. And I do have some ideas. If you can empirically show that you're being overrun, or that the work of the municipality is being adversely impacted by the level of MFIPA requests, I have some ideas about how to resolve that. And they start with the provincial order. I'm not sure answering MFIPA requests right now has been deemed as an essential service. So that's one way we'll deal with it. And I'm happy to discuss that with anybody. I am not saying, and Nuala is not saying, that you should simply ignore requests or simply refuse requests. But if you have a demonstrable problem, we can help you with that. And so that goes to then the next topic as well. We not just MFIPA requests, but we're finding municipal staff during the emergency are being inundated with questions from ratepayers or groups of ratepayers. And sometimes in some municipalities, those are also being seen being repetitive questions. And so a solution that we have developed with a number of our clients dealing with this problem, and I suppose to explain the problem a little bit further, many of our clients are running into a situation where often one or two ratepayers or a group of ratepayers have really taken on the mantle of challenging every single thing that council does. And they write letter after letter, often quite demanding of a response and really getting rather aggressive. And the problem and the important issue for council to understand when that's happening is that every time your staff person has to answer one of these questions, or frankly any question, they're spending their time. And when they're spending their time, when staff are spending their time to answer questions, because they're paid by ratepayer funds and taxpayers' money, that is an expenditure of taxpayers' money. So we need to, as council, understand that it's council's role to look out for the way that municipal funds are being expended. And so in an effort to avoid this, because we've got instances where staff are spending 2 or 3 days per week answering these questions. So what's happening is the ratepayers are really usurping council's role, and the ratepayers are causing and directing the expenditure of a significant portion of public funds. And so if that's a problem in your municipality, we're seeing a couple of policy solutions that are working. One is to have something that's been called an unreasonable customer behavior policy, or an unreasonable behavior policy, or a public conduct policy. And these are policies that lay out what council has decided is inappropriate communication, primarily inappropriate conduct by communication in the municipality. And the policies have specific examples of what unacceptable behavior is. So it's things, this is a build on to your harassment policy. So it's aggressive and nasty communication on the one hand, but it's also repetitive, continuing to ask questions about an issue that council has already decided. So the policy then goes on to restrict, to sort of empower your staff about how they answer or don't answer, and put parameters around the access that the ratepayers have to ask these questions. So in conjunction with the unreasonable behavior policy, which can have things like trespass notices, prohibition from areas in the municipality, all sorts of things like that. And I'll tell you that the Ombudsman has recently had a look at this and approved these kinds of policies out of Wasaga Beach and Red Rock as 2 examples. So it's an aggressive policy, it's a protective policy, but it is something that the Ombudsman is approving. So building on that is the idea of a communications committee. And what happens in that situation is council develops a committee of council that's going to receive and review communications from groups or individuals that are identified by council as a problem. And as an example, for some of the people that have been identified like this in our experience, they're sending more than 30 or 40 emails in a day and expecting responses. So if you're getting that kind of magnitude, that's sort of a threshold that council can use to say, okay, you, Mr. Ratepayer, are going to have to send your communications to the communication committee of council. That committee is then going to review the communication and make a recommendation to council about what action is going to be taken. And then council makes a decision and issues a direction to staff about what action to take. And so it's not prohibiting communication, which would be problematic, but it is putting parameters around the communication so that council's still in control of what money is being spent, and you don't have a single ratepayer spending 3/4 of your CAO's salary dealing with this kind of communication. So those are some tools that we have been working on recently in a number of municipalities, and we're happy to help out. They're not really a template agreement, because we need to look at what your problem is and the magnitude and the systems, and so it's not something we can necessarily give to that you can necessarily import, but you need to know that this is something that is being used in other municipalities. It is certainly a problem that council needs to be cognizant of, and we have some ideas to help with that. Nuala, did you have any comments about the communications protocols?
It's always a balance, as you know, and you'll see in municipal law, definitely the trend is getting much more towards input from your community. And another chorus that you hear us say a lot is that council is made up of the community, and the community is made up of council, and council needs staff and stuff. And it's really a hand-in-glove relationship. So it's important, I think, when you're passing these type of policies, to be clear to your community and to your council. This isn't about me shirking off work. That's not what it's about. It's the opposite. It's so that I can do the very best work for council and the very best work for the community, rather than getting gummed up with one individual who is, and I think every community has somebody that just, I don't know, they're frustrated lawyers or frustrated, I don't know, but they really seem to engage to an excessive degree, and it goes nowhere. I don't mind a huge volume of work if it lands somewhere, but this is often just born of boredom, or to make a point, or to, frankly, sometimes to stick it to the municipality and try and paralyze the operation so that they can't move forward. That's the type of situations that we want to bring forward. It's very important that that messaging gets out simultaneously with the communication limitation policy that you're thinking about. It's for vexatious, voluminous requests that that seem to never go answered. In the litigation sphere, if you've got somebody that's constantly going to court, there is a step you can take to say, listen, court, this guy, all he does is go to court. You need to limit that. And there's a step that you can take like that. So we're modeling something very similar to say, if that's your situation and you're not getting to the bread and butter of your work, you have the right to correct that, and it should be corrected. But make sure the balance is there so that you're not telling legitimate members of the community, we don't want to hear from you. We do want to hear from you. We're here for you. We want your voice. The voice we don't want is the one that is counterproductive.
Thanks, Nuala. So we'll move on to the Keeping the Team Healthy presentation from Mia and Nuala, and I'll just hand it over quickly.
I'm going to start. Mia and I are going to tag team this. It became a really big subject matter when we started it, and I'm very aware of everyone's time. So we've kind of trimmed it down. There's much more, and maybe there'll be a section on it going forward again. But really, we were looking at stress, burnout, and mental health of the essential worker. I know when I started doing this, I began really looking at people really at your scale So I was really targeting sort of CAOs, clerks, treasurers, people that are pretty high up on the municipal ladder. But in short order, it became clear that the opposite end also has to be identified. And by that, I mean, very many of the essential workers, I think we're seeing right now, just as a community, what we're seeing is, boy, it'd be very difficult to do what we're doing without the people running the gas pumps, without, for me, the Tim Horton clerk, without the grocery clerks. And in your municipality, it's the same thing. The cleaners, the security guards, the people driving the bus, the people cleaning the bus, those are all essential workers, as well as the higher end administration. So we're really going to look at stress, burnout, and mental health for you as employees, and also for you as an essential employer. So the people that are reporting to you, things that you can do to make sure that their day is safe and healthy. And as Paul said at the outset, we're hoping to present this section because I think it's very important for City Council to know what you're doing. And I would like really the opportunity to talk to them about their role as essential politicians, really, and their role as essential employers. So we're going to start with talking about burnout, and I'm going to ask Mia to kind of describe what that term means.
Thank you, Nuala. Hi, everyone. I'm just trying to get my computer to cooperate with me here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout, as Nuala mentioned, and then she'll discuss a little bit about stress. So burnout can be a result of many things, including unrelenting stress, but this is not the same as too much stress. Stress involves, like we said, too many pressures and demand from you physically and mentally, and it's common that those who are stressed, they think that if everything's under control, then you'll feel better. Burnout is about not enough. So you feel mentally exhausted, you lack motivation, and sometimes you feel like there may be no light at the end of the tunnel. Excessive stress, on the other hand, feels like you're drowning, whereas burnout feels like there's nothing left. And if you get to the point where you're burned out, then there can be some long-term effects that come along with this. Some of those long-term effects include reduced productivity, feeling like eventually you're going to have nothing else to give in your job because you've just been working so hard at it. And it's something that's gradual and kind of creeps up on you. When you start to feel like you're not yourself anymore, then don't be afraid to address that. The Canadian Mental Health Association, their website has a number of excellent resources that deal with stress and deal with burnout. So it's a good resource to look at when we're dealing with the stress and the effects of what's going on with COVID and dealing with it and just getting used to it. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that. What I'll do now is I'll turn it over to Nuala to talk about the stress portion of it.
Yeah, so stress is really the opposite of burnout. And a lot of times a little bit of stress is good for you. And by that I mean, I think it'd be difficult to speak publicly without feeling a little bit nervous before you did that. I think it's very natural if you're presenting something to council that you feel worried and stressed. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps your adrenaline high, and it often makes for a better product in terms of whether it's your presentation or your discussion or whatever it is that you're doing. But it can really backfire on you. If it feels like an emotional sort of a roller coaster, you feel pulled at all ends, that you can't think linearly. And there are, both with stress and burnout, long-term identifiable physical results. With stress, you often see heart disease. Now they're saying that there can be a connection between certain cancers and stress. With burnout, you see depression and apathy, and just a lack of interest in living. It can also lead to a lower immune system. You can see a real correlation between these emotional issues and the physical long-term consequence of them. So it's if you were thinking, say as an employer, that all you wanted was the bottom line, all you wanted is to continue to operate and get through this pandemic as best you can, well then the essential workers are your backbone. It's critical to keep them healthy. I mean, if you were looking at just the bottom line, there's an investment in keeping these people healthy. The thing about stress and burnout, it's not a new problem. It's always been there in terms of and just the way we live now, just the way the workplaces are, and just how much work people are doing. Really, with technology now, there is no 9 to 5. The clock never stops. That's not a new problem, but it's a more pervasive problem now because of the pandemic. Everything is more difficult now. And there's a level of worry that's seeping into a lot of people's lives that you can't dismiss. And the way we react to it varies, of course, from individual to individual. Some people are very repulsed at the thought of a communicable disease. This is their deepest fear. And now, my goodness, there's nowhere to run. The entire world is shut down. So it can be very, very, very overwhelming. Managing that uncertainty in this time is critical for our health, for our mental health, and for our physical health. So we're going to look at what you, as an essential employee, can do to keep yourself healthy if you have to work during this time. And Mia's got some tips on what the essential employee can do to stay safe.
So I think it's paramount that we always keep in mind our physical safety and our mental health safety. So when it comes to physical safety, if you're sick, stay at home. Self-quarantine when required, isolate when required, and the Ministry of Health has a tool on their website. It's to take a self-assessment. So, I know we panic if we sneeze once or we have a cough, and then we start to think, oh my God, am I sick? Do I have it? Am I getting it? To calm your nerves, the Ministry of Health has the self-assessment tool, and they have a number of great resources on their website as well. It's always important to remember to practice social distancing, wash your hands as much as you can, disinfect surfaces, always keep that in mind. Avoid touching your face, avoid touching your eyes, and just all around limit exposure for yourself. So that speaks to your physical safety. When it comes to your mental health safety, it's important to remember that balance is key. Always stay focused, but then know when it's time to take a few minutes, to take a breather, and to kind of regroup, because like we talked about last week, I think the common theme is that everybody is overwhelmed at this point. Stay informed, but sometimes too much information is not beneficial. Limit how often you check sources such as social media and the news. Things are changing rapidly right now, but daily changes are not necessarily going to affect how you should manage risk. So constantly checking may not be a benefit to you, but to check often enough is helpful. So set aside some time to unplug from social media, from your phone, and do something fun, do something healthy, read, go for walks, or just take some quiet time for yourself. So that's important too. When you decide I need to take that breather, you don't necessarily need to turn to doing something else. It may just be sitting, taking everything in, and taking a few minutes for yourself. And I think it's important to deal with situations in a structured way. So identify the current situations around you, and then determine, okay, this is actually an issue. I have to deal with this now. And then there's other things that don't have to be solved right away. And it's important to remember that as humans, we are very resilient, and we have to be careful not to get kind of carried away with the what ifs. We need to deal with what's going on now and what is important. So that speaks a lot to our mental health safety and what we can do there. And our stress and anxieties often cause us to focus on the negatives and then that's what triggers the what ifs and can sometimes lead us to overestimate how bad things are and then underestimate how well we actually are doing in managing the crisis. So those are some tips right there for physical and mental health safety. So I can turn it over to Nuala now, and she'll talk about what the essential employer can do.
Yeah, so I'm just going to redirect now and look at your role as an employer of essential employees. Again, first step always is safety is the priority. So those same tips that Mia just went through, you tell your essential employees, if you're sick, do not come to work. And that needs to be more than just lip service. I remember working for a person, and if you called in sick, say, "Hi, it's Nuala, I'm sick today, I won't be in," there was silence on the other end of the phone. So not thrilled that I wasn't coming into work. So saying it and actually meaning it are two different things. Right now, it is absolutely, it's life-threatening. It's very important that people who are sick do not come to work. So say it and mean it. Create an atmosphere where it is okay for people to say, "I'm sick, and that means I'm going to be off for at least 14 days. You need to foster that. They're doing the right thing. By your essential employee doing that, they're actually keeping you and your family safe. All the other things, the hand washing, the reminders, I'm looking at Tim's degrees, but normally what we have is we've got a number of posters throughout our workplace that say, here's how to wash your hands, here's how to stay away. So getting that message across. We have hand sanitizer in all of our workstations. We have Lysol wipes. I think we got the last ones in Sault Ste. Marie, but we have them here. You need to have those type of products available for your staff so that they feel safe. That's the first number one priority that'll never change. Second is communication. Right now is a time where communication has never been more vital. I read something recently that said, we stand together, apart during this pandemic, and I really like that. That's the messaging that we want to get across. I know a number of people have said to me, my supervisor called, she didn't have anything to say, she just wanted to see how I was doing. That's a great practice. And in particular, I would say for people that are deskless, so the guys that are cleaning your buses, the people that are working at works, it's very important that there's some communication with them. They don't generally have a laptop with them, but they almost always have a cell phone. So a reach out like that to know and genuinely show a concern for how they're doing and how they're managing, not just with work, but even in terms of their stress level and their mental wellness and how their family is doing. That goes a very long way to make somebody feel important in the organization. And my goodness, if we've learned one thing from this pandemic, it's who's important. And I'm taken aback, I'm humbled at how important the workers are at Canadian Tire, at the local grocery store, at the pharmacy. So it's quite a humbling experience, and that needs to be conveyed. In that vein, employee recognition. These people, I mean, not to be melodramatic, but they really are heroic. They're really doing an amazing job right now, and very often for the lowest pay in our organizations. So if you do not have an employee recognition program, now's the time to invent one. If you do have one, now's the time to start applying it. And a recognition doesn't have to be a plaque on the wall. It can be simply an email. It can be, and sometimes if you're working in a city or town hall and you're the CAO, you're the clerk, you're the treasurer, you're up in an administrative office, you're very familiar with, seeing the mayor. It's not an intimidating process for you, but a lot of people that don't get that privilege to get an email from the CAO or from a mayor saying, well done, I noticed you doing X, Y, or Z. It means a lot to me that you've done that. That can go a very, very, very long way. As adults, we rarely get the recognition that we got as children, but the desire is still there. The hunger is still there. Finally, it's important to ask the employees what they need. So if you do a reach out and say, good job, how are you managing? And they say, well, I'm worried because X, Y, or Z. How can I help with that? What would you like to see? Would it be better if you guys had masks? Can I outfit that for you? What is the need? Rather than coming in and superimposing our ideas of, what would be good if the works guys did X, ask them. It's respectful, and very often it's one of the most productive things that you can do in terms of employee satisfaction. So I also want to say that every municipality is different. And some of these responses need to be tailored to the municipality. So if you find that there's an area where you're not sure how to, we've heard some amazingly creative things from our municipal clients of what they have done to make people feel safe during this very unusual time. So if you have questions about that, do not hesitate to speak to us after. Reach out, do an email. You know, we have an unusual situation with this person or that person, and we're very, very, very aware. We're going to talk in another session about what you can do if you only have one works person, if you only have one, what we can do in terms of backup for that. So we've got great ideas. A lot of them came from the field, where other municipalities were suggesting ideas to us. So we've got lots of resources available, and that basically wraps up what Mia and I have to say about stress, mental health, and burnout in the workplace. Please take it seriously. It can be as damaging as any physical ailment, more so often. So please take it seriously. Please take care of yourselves, and please convey that to your essential employees. I think Paul might have our test results back.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for participating in that. It does seem like there are some trends which, frankly, we kind of expected, but it does look like everybody's doing a lot more work than they typically do. The stress levels are up for more than 2/3 of the, more than 3/4 of our group, and more than half are certainly worried about what to do in the pandemic. So we're going to deal with that in more detail next week, and we hope that you would invite councils to those. So now I'm going to hand this over to Mia. She's going to, as she does, give us some wrap up, some helpful reminders and ideas. And so if I'll hand this over to Mia.
Thanks. The first two webinars, I spoke a little bit about electronic meetings, so I just want to circle back to that very briefly, just for some reminders to always keep on the top of our list. There is that when electronic meetings are occurring, just make sure to keep your microphone muted when you're not speaking, and always ensure to announce yourself when you get on the call and before you speak, because as we know, sometimes it's difficult to have a lot of people talking, and sometimes we don't know who's talking, so that's very important there. Another thing I just want to briefly talk about is communication. So communication is definitely key right now during this time. Municipalities should be communicating in a way that a clear message is coming out, you know, in a way that can ripple across different sources, and then eventually connect the public with reliable resources. So it could be something as simple as a tweet going out, and then, you know, somebody retweeting it, and then another person retweeting it, and then eventually, you know, the message is getting out to a big body. Be good to your staff, you know, exhibit good behavior and have compassion. Municipalities across the country, you know, have mobilized very quickly to put in place things that, you know, have to be done. It's also important to use the right language. So sometimes language that we don't understand scares us. When you're angry, sometimes we use negative language. We need to get in the habit right now more than ever to be using a positive language. One thing also too that I want to talk about is when responding to emails. Make sure, you know, you look at your address list and you're careful when you're using the reply or the reply all feature. As busy as we are right now, sometimes people are less careful at paying attention to that. So it's easy to get caught up in an emergency attitude and constantly living in that stressful feeling and that panic feeling. So those are just things to be mindful of. Crisis leadership right now is very important, and I want to kind of speak very quickly to, I'm being mindful of the time, to credibility, teams, leading by example, and stamina. So very quickly, credibility. Managing any crisis is having a good understanding of the facts. So people are looking to the leader of the organization to convey the facts in a very calm manner. With respect to teams, March seems like it was a very long time ago at this point, but we have to think back to how critical your team was in pivoting quickly to a virtual workplace. That's something to be very proud of. Assembling and maintaining a suitable team to respond to a crisis is a cornerstone in the crisis management planning aspect of everything. Leading by example, the steps you take are being watched very closely right now, and they must not only align with the values of your organization, but also at the direction that you've taken right now in your organization. And lastly, stamina. Something right now with this crisis that we may not have had with other crises, the length and uncertainty of when it's going to pass is very different. This is something that we really don't know. So plan for crisis with different issues arising at different stages, including a plan for transition to a post-crisis environment. That's very important. And you must also be prepared to accept that the health, economic, and regulatory landscape in which we're working in right now is going to change every day, which, you know, we've kind of touched on throughout the webinars, and that's always something to be mindful of. And of course, like we say, what is paramount is your mental and physical health of yourself and your workforce. So that's also very important. And I'll turn it back to Paul.
Thanks, Mia. So a couple of things just in wrapping up. We did get a question, an interesting question about whether the 5-person order applies to council meetings, specifically the order that prohibits people from attending a public event that has more than 5 people. Our opinion collectively is that that order does apply to council meetings. I've heard that some municipalities have called the ministry and not got a clear response. Our answer is that it does apply to council meetings. Some people have suggested that clearly the provincial legislature and the federal parliament are continuing, notwithstanding this order. And that actually strengthens our opinion, because the federal legislation is paramount legislation in Canada. So the federal government is not subject to the provincial order. And the provincial order is the product of the province. And so they can abide by their order or not. Because we're a tertiary level of government, we are a statutory level of government, we're bound by the legislation that comes to us from the province. And so where the legislation has done 2 things. One, prohibited organized public events. And I would suggest that a council meeting is clearly an organized public event pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act. Those are prohibited where there's more than 5 people. Actually, it's not the event, it's the people that are prohibited from attending. And additionally, the province enacted shortly after declaring the emergency, the Municipal Emergency Act 2020, which provides council with the ability to have council meetings electronically. So when you put all that together, our opinion in answer to that question is that council meetings are subject to the 5-person order. And so if you have a 5-person council and a clerk, as most of us do, one of those people at least must not be physically present at the meeting. So I thought that I would provide that as a clarification. And then to finish, Nuala and Mia spoke a lot about mental health and taking care of your workers. And one of the realities, and we're going to reiterate this to council next week, is that the personality type that works as senior management in municipalities often puts the need of their workers, of their staff, of their community ahead of themselves. And we've told you that you need to take some time for yourself and go out and get some exercise and stuff like that. And I know that probably most of us, myself included, are saying, yeah, that's great advice. We should do that. I'm going to write that down, and then I'm not going to get up from my chair for another 3 hours. And so my suggestion is going to be that as the management team for our people, we need actually to enforce a commitment to that wellness behavior. We need to require our staff to take some time for themselves, take some breaks, prove to us that they are getting up and having a walk, because without the staff, the municipality isn't able to function. And the same is true of council. So we have to really look after ourselves, and I fear that the people at the top level of management, and frankly probably most of my team, are not the best at taking our own advice. And so it is really important to require a commitment to that health, because we can't afford to lose these essential workers. So I appreciate you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate the questions. We're looking forward to having council on in addition to staff next week. We'll talk a little bit about what we've learned from the poll, and we'll talk about more prioritizing issues and policies that council can be looking at to manage through the crisis. And then on the horizon, something that we're working on is a plan to help come back to normal after the emergency is over. So I thank you so much for attending. I'm sorry we're about 10 minutes over time, and we will see you all next week. Remember to look for us in your junk mail in case our material's going there. Thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everyone.